So, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome to Tabadlab Live. This is after COVID, our first live event, and also our first event in this new space. You just talked to us about, your research findings and maybe an updated version of that. I mean, for the UNDP, grateful that you did what you did, but also it would be great to see kind of like a 2021 or really now 2022 remix. Because I think some things have happened that confirm a lot of the fears and the findings, and some things haven't happened or have happened maybe a bit differently. I think COVID was a big game changer, or supposedly a game changer in terms of how we see the world. So in terms of research questions, one that we'd love to work on is what has happened since the report came out. Adil, the report is built on three pillars, which are really, they fit the theme really well, the theme of the youth, but B, they fit into each other really well. So it's education, so that's how the youngs are supposed to start their life, and then employment, as they go from the age of being educated to the age of being adults, they need to be employed or they need to have some source of income, to engagement. And engagement could mean a whole bunch of things. I always find the last one the most interesting, partly because I think development has failed on both education and on employment. So my view is Malik Riaz offers a better game changer and a better development model for both education and for employment than anything we've come up with in development. And of course, I'm saying things like this deliberately to kind of get people to think, and that's a serious proposition. What has development done that Malik Riaz hasn't done better on education or on employment? But the question is, can anyone do anything on engagement unless there are some real fundamentals that we change about how societies are organized? This isn't just a question that is dogging Pakistan. This is a question, I think, that is hounding the US, the UK. It's hounding old countries, places like Japan and Italy, where the median age was 51 when COVID struck. And it's hounding young countries like Afghanistan, where the median age was 19 and a half, Pakistan, where the median age is 23. How do you see the future of engagement, notwithstanding what happens on employment and on education? Whether these things get fixed or not, the proposition I'm posing to you is, even if you had perfect education and perfect employment, you wouldn't really have a solution for the engagement part of the equation. And we're seeing that in the Western industrialized nations.
Yeah, good question, very good question, which means I don't have an answer. So I'm seeking time to think about it. But really good question, because it's a hard question. Proposition one, just the only pushback I would have it is that you can't disentangle the three, right? So even if you did perfectly on engagement and don't do perfectly good well on the others, this will fall off. That's partly what other countries are also finding, right? That's the human development context. In some ways, if you recall human development as health, wealth, knowledge, what we were doing was, knowledge is kind of education when you are young. Wealth is mostly about employment when you are young. And health doesn't happen because you get sick, because you are at an age when you are generally, but mental health and engagement was our surrogate for that, right? And that's the entry point into this. So you are right that the three are interlinked. B, you are right that Malik Riaz as a surrogate or others, development is not going to fix any of these problems. Right? Development can give you models, development can give you exemplars, but if you think that we are going to get even education simply by government action, right? Given the current structure, it doesn't really work like that, and especially engagement doesn't. The engagement challenge, I think, is partly more profound in Pakistan because, and this is I keep trying to provoke, it is not just that the country is not engaging with young people. Young people aren't engaging with young people. Right? Best thing that happened to me was I ended up in UAT Lahore in a hostel. That enabled me to encounter the rest of Pakistan's young people. I figured out, Mara dosto tha Toba, because he was from Toba Take Singh. I figured out how to converse with him, which is not a skill that you have, not you, that many young people have. Right? In fact, one of the things that's happened to the challenge you are saying is, it has become less and less likely that young people from, for example, geographically, one part of the country are interacting with another. It has become less and less likely that people from one economic group, young people from one economic, is from another. So in that cards that I sent sort of throughout, one of my other favorite ones was, coming from young people, schemes that get people from one part of the country to come and intern with government in another part of the country. Right? Again, that's what UET did for me. I'll tell you a very odd fact. You're from LUMS. I had the privilege of spending time at LUMS. But a deep fact, people will be surprised. LUMS is now amongst the very few places left in Pakistan where young people from across the country live under the same roof. Because most of your universities have become regional, right? Qaid-e-Azam University is another. So this question of mobility and interaction is there. Now, I would also say, if I'm understanding your question right, employment, for example, cannot be disengaged from engagement because khali khuli pet pe engagement nahi hoti. Right? Because when you are, again, the age group we are talking about, right? At that age group, that employment question is so important. So with that comes the mobility question. One of the interesting findings of this and since then is that mobility might have, I don't know the exact number on this, but the likelihood is that mobility has gone down in Pakistan rather than up. Right? So in a way, what I'm trying to do here is that unless we start opening those questions, ये engagement वाला question simply as कि जी मैंने एक कमेटी बनानी है उस पे 4 लोग आप बिठा दें जो young हैं, so right? That creates another an enclave, but doesn't really solve your engagement question.
Well, to my mind, I think you've really sort of narrowed in on the core of the what was informing or driving my question, Dr. Najam. I'm not sure that we have the tools, even if there was a complete political consensus that we are going to start engaging the youth from tomorrow. I don't think anyone, and again, this is not just a Pakistan problem, I think this is a global challenge. We don't actually know how to. We know that it has to be through an app, just because we heard somebody young talk about that, or it was on a World Economic Forum video that we watched, on some business class flight somewhere. But we actually don't know what it actually means to engage. How would you engage? What does engagement actually mean? Does it mean talking at people? Does it mean listening?
That's what the app will do for you. Right? App is going to give you 240 characters. I can shout in 240 characters. I can't have a conversation in 240 characters. Right? But go ahead.
Well, I mean, that's really the question. The apps we have maybe can't do it, but I don't think that this is just a technology question. I think this is a way of thinking about the way the world is structured today. The one thing that I find that is alarming to me is that the aspirations and exposure of the have-nots all over the world is now matching the aspirations and appetite and exposure of the haves, which wasn't always the case. And so the level of anger and angst and fury and rage is being fueled by this constant consumption. What I'm watching, the thirst trapping on my Instagram is the same one that the guy who's driving my car or cleaning my lawn or whatever. All of those things are the same. We're going to take a break for the azan. So I'd asked you about, how this is going to happen. Has there been any thinking globally or, by you, by others, on what engagement will look like in the 21st century? And now we're a fifth of the way through the 21st century, which oftentimes I don't think people realize. We're talking about the 21st century as some future thing. You're right. You're
20%, 21, I guess. So, but you're right here. First, you are exactly right on the global part, and I won't spend too much time on it. But I'm glad you highlighted it. So, engagement is probably the US's single biggest problem right now, too, right, or challenge right now. It manifests there in terms of race, it manifests there in terms of lifestyle, it manifests there in terms of values and so on and so forth. It manifests here in terms of values, but it also manifests in other ways and so on and so forth. So engagement, you're exactly right, is a global challenge, which means that we may also have some ways of learning about it. Now, I am an optimist. as I think you are, you may have a persona that's different, but those socks confirm that you have to be an optimist, as does my sweater. Right? इस उम्र में पिंक स्वेटर पहन के फिरता रहता हूँ. So yeah, there has to be something to it. And I say that for a reason. So I don't want to sound like a Buddha Baba and say कि यार technology is the problem, which is very often how it happens. And even in the report we talked about how some of these technologies actually highlight anger. Right? You have 240 characters. You can only vote things good up and down. Things can't be somewhat right and somewhat wrong. They can either be pathetically wrong or they can be glorious. Right? Because these technologies are not very well thought out. But technology is not the problem, because it's not going to go away, right? Just because I say so. The challenge, I don't think the answers will come from on the technology side. I'll come to the other point in a minute. The answer is not going to come from an app, but the answer is likely to come from how apps get used. And I will give you as an optimistic answer something that you introduced me to. Actually, Tabadlab, I think, introduced me to. Twitter anger, that clip you didn't hear, was about angry people on Twitter गालियां देते हुए. Here is the thing I got introduced, I think, because of you and Tabadlab is, on Twitter, for example, it's happened elsewhere, these, क्या कहते हैं वो जो discussion forum होते हैं? Spaces came in, right? So I now sometimes sort of linger in the middle of the night, camouflage myself and listen in. And it's very interesting. The interaction on Spaces is different from the interaction on Twitter, even when the people are the same. Because that mechanicalness of just a screen between you has now been nuanced by the reality of a voice. Right? Gussa bhi aata hai. It's not that people change what they're saying, but something else starts happening in how people interact. In fact, if I remain in my optimist mode for a minute, maybe that sort of interaction gives you that interaction between, at least on Twitter Spaces, there are interactions between class and region that is unlikely to happen elsewhere. Right? Now, I may be wrong in my optimism, but what I'm getting at is the answer to technology is never to stop a technology. It is to think about how we use the technology. My ranting about how Twitter has made people angry is not going to have Twitter stop it. But my thinking about and creating the use of Twitter, Spaces and so on and so forth in a different way. And that's happened with every technology. It happened with the newspaper, it happened with the book, it happened with the pen. Now the other optimistic part, if I'm right on this, then the policy space is not just what the government does. It is also what society and technology does and people do to the societal realities, of which technology is only one, that we are dealt with. Now I'll give you an example of real policy, again because Kamyab Jawan wale are here. When we think of youth and policy, and I don't think I can take credit, but I would give them credit, and I'm glad we also raised it. We immediately think कि जी employment किस तरह बनती है, jobs बनाओ. Right? I remember having this conversation, job कैसे बनती है, government is going to create something which is going to create a job. Yeah, there is no government in the world that's going to create 1.5 million jobs a year. आप एक नई रेलवे भी बना लेंगे तो कितने भर्ती कर लेंगे? Right? So you rethink that by saying, how do you create the ecosystem in which people create jobs for other people? Right? Now, similarly in education, whenever we think of education, we immediately think of just the government, knowing, as you know much better than me, that most of the educational space is actually not under the influence of government. It is private sector, it is parents, it is teachers that are really the driving force. If you're going to move that lever. Now the most interesting one again is the engagement, and this is the thing I was saying with Kamyab Jawan. One of the things that, please give him my best for doing that, the sports mela that was done. This is not a political statement. I think baki bhi kar lete. The reason I was really happy to see that happen, that's engagement. You get young people, you get them, it doesn't matter if it creates a gold medal for you or not. It creates interaction breeds engagement. People figure out what they don't like about each other, they figure out ways to deal with what they don't like each other, they figure out things they like about each other. they build bridges. So if that is the model, right, then you start thinking of engagement at, for example, the local election jo abhi, for example, hui, right? Where is engagement happening at the district level? Where is it happening in your city level, right? आप जिना से ऊपर जाके बैठ जाएं, and that's engagement. You just people watch. Give people spaces to people watch.
So I think the public square, of course, is essential to the notion of social capital. And in many ways, when we talk about youth and demography, we're really talking about how we build social capital that is future-proof. And that's really the challenge, is a future-proof social capital needs to have a quantum of education at a certain quality, needs to be able to generate income and employment opportunities that helps people build assets, not just assets in terms of wealth, but otherwise as well. And that needs to translate into the ability to engage intergenerationally, intra-generationally, and across class and other kinds of societal divides. So I think this much is clear from your talk, and this is the last question I'll ask, and then I'll ask others to jump in. But I wanted to ask you about how you converge the conversation that we've had so far with the notion of institutions. And I'll present my thesis, which is that, again, globally, but especially in Pakistan, the institutions of the public institutions do not have the wherewithal to engage with either education or employment or engagement, simply because they were built of and by a different era. The people that are trying to constantly resuscitate these institutions, and I go so far as to say, for example, that the Pakistani Constitution is a dated instrument of engagement. The judiciary, for sure, all over the world, but especially in a country where caseloads are far beyond what the actual throughput capacity of the judiciary is. Your law enforcement, your public discourse even, the way that it's conducted, the television channel. I mean, I agree with you, Twitter Spaces is great. But if Twitter Spaces is great, what does the existing media represent? And I think it represents people shouting into the void, and that creating a certain ruckus, and that ruckus being seen as real engagement, and it's not. Is there any hope for the forging of new institutions that the process and conversation about new institutions is not hijacked by spoilers? Because as soon as you, for example, I say constitution, suddenly a bunch of military junta type people say, Mosharraf sir, man, let's double down. Let's actually say more about how democracy is bad, it doesn't deliver. Federalism is bad, it doesn't deliver. And actually, that's not really what I'm saying. I'm saying that for the challenges of this population, what we have as a set of institutions is not working. How do we begin engaging with the question of new institutions for a new age of growth and development?
Yeah, I agree with the basic proposition. I'm glad you made it. Institutions are a major issue here. And I like the way you define institutions. Institutions are more than organizations and legal structures and so on and so forth. When you say make institution, I think you don't mean it, but it can be interpreted as if someone is going to come and say, these are the institutions you need, I'm now going to define them. That's not going to work. I don't think the young people are not asking anywhere in the world, they're not asking you to do something for me. And the ones who are, I'm sorry, I'm not interested in them. They're essentially saying, please get out of my way. Right? And what I'm saying is the institutional question is going to be answered not by new things you can do, but also answered and maybe answered more by old things that you stopped doing. वो जो होता है ना कि यार इधर तस्वीर नहीं खींच सकते, एयरपोर्ट पे मुझे कह रहे थे आप इधर तस्वीर नहीं खींच सकते, मैं कह यार मैं ट्वीट करूंगा दो चार देख लेंगे और कुछ नहीं होगा इससे, गूगल वाला भी दिखा देगा. But the thing is, it's if you hear young people across the world and list it out, I think most of those things are not about give me this. And as I said, there are those who are rentiers or whatever, I'm not interested in them. Most of them are saying, stop putting hurdles in my way. Right? And every generation, I'm sorry again to the young people, you are not the first ones to do this. हमने भी किया था. And I realize my parents also did the same. That's part of being young. right? Part of being young is figuring out the inconsistency of some of the social barriers. Chahe wo shaadi ka ho, right? Chahe wo, when I was young, the question was, you become an engineer or a doctor, right? And so that, just to give one, and we should open up. I've been talking this morning about this. This anger, to link the global thing. So the anger globe is not just a Pakistani anger. It is a global anger. So remember, agar aap kar sakein, scroll itna piche on your Facebook or Twitter, what were the photographs you had on your feed in January 2020? Right? When we were first presenting this, Umar, what were the photographs that were on the global level? Agar aap newspaper dekhne kya. It was angry young people in Lebanon. It was Greta on climate. It was angry young people on the streets of London, Extinction Rebellion. It was angry young people in Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Right? I'm talking January 2020. It was angry young people in Hong Kong. It was angry young people in Chile. Right? There is a reason for this anger, which is mediated by technology. ऐसा नहीं था कि पहले anger नहीं था, but technology allows that anger, and it allows. What I was arguing this morning was that one of the ways democracy has changed is that elections don't happen after 4 years or 5 years. They happen 10 times every day. Right? You vote it up or down. And that is creating this hectic cycle for politicians, as well as not just the media, but for everyone, because you have this constant, it's like stock market, that it's going. And that's the space to go. So one liner on the institutional question is not, to me, the interesting question is not as much what new can I do, but it is partly what old is now redundant enough. Right? We are seeing this with identity questions, we are seeing this with all sorts of things.
Fantastic. I think, if I was to just tack on my little spiel, it would be that in addition to education and employment and engagement, there's a underlying E that is pulling down and dragging down youth everywhere, and again, especially in Pakistan, and that's the elite. That the elite is calcified dinosaurs that are looking to sustain the rents and the powers that they currently possess. And so it's not accidental that people are in the way. And I think that's one mistake that I think a lot of analytically we all make, is that we assume that, oh, this just happens to be an old institution and it's a dinosaur, and oh, I wish it could get out of the way. Well, it's in the way because that's where it feeds and sustains itself. So if it was to get out of the way, it would be a net negative for somebody. And there's a fight that needs to happen for that to change. And I wonder if among the many institutional weaknesses of the world and the times that you and I represent and the age that we are, and you are much older than I am, even though you don't look it, is the fact that people don't want to get out of the way.
Sure. Sure. And why should they? You shouldn't expect them to. It's not like मैं कहूँगा कि please stop oppression, and they will say okay. That's never happened historically that way. One liner on this, you're right on the elite thing, but again, I'm trying to be provocative. You can be young and elite.
Of course.
Right? So just because you're young does not give you a pass from being elite.
I guess for me, the question when we talk about the youth, particularly in Pakistan in the current context, is TLP. And I'm really perplexed by the surprise. Why are they so angry? Of course they're angry. And they're coming. And they've been saying things in many different ways through many different instruments, including Imran Khan. And the system, the elite, the calcified elite in particular, is not responding. So if it doesn't respond, then eventually bad things happen.
I want to hear from them, but allow me one more, because you've mentioned TLP. I hope we are amongst friends, even if we are being recorded. TLP is a youth movement.
Sure.
I look at TLP, I don't see old people. Now to their leader is also young, right? So that's the question I'm saying. We need to open this up. It's now redundant to say this is a contest between young and not young. I'll give you another. In the report when we talk about the APS, we use this line which still haunts me. The people who died in APS, the young people who died in APS, no. The people who did the killing in APS were not very much older than the people who did the dying in APS. right? That's the challenge.
So we have people who are not from within the organization. So we're going to start with the Umar.
Sure. I'm just like, while being part of the team who made the report, but UNDP has also moved on. We are thinking about the next human development report, and the theme of which is very much related to what you said about technology, right? So how do you see the 3 E's, education, employment, engagement, and the human development concept, like, for the youth, be influenced by, or how digital transformation in that context would enhance or affect human development, youth development, or access to education, employment, engagement.
Sure. You want to take a few and come back to them, or how do you?
Yeah, sure. Let's do that. So Umar's asking about the technology and the merger. You'll remember these questions because I know I won't. Aliza, you.
Thank you guys so much for this invigorating talk, and Dr. Najam for this lecture. My question has to do with, your comments on TLP and earlier on TLP reminded me of this book, Migrants and Militants, Fun and Urban Violence in Pakistan. And it looks at how young men in violent communities partaking in revolt find it fun. And people applied this analysis to Sialkot as well, that this was a space for fun. And if you look at videos of TLP rallies, and you mentioned that they are like a youth movement, it genuinely looks like that they are having fun. They are in a way dancing to the movement. I guess I'm just wondering where, like, in this human development equation, does fun factor in? Do you feel like there are healthy spaces for fun in Pakistan? Is fun political? I think we can agree that there is sort of like a Victorian sensibility or morality sort of question that often does become legislated as well, as we see with TikTok bans. So I think I would really just love to hear your thoughts on fun and politics.
I think profoundly important question. Thank you, Aliza. Same? Your question better be better than Aliza's.
It's a similar question because thank you for the interesting talk. It was regarding the TLP element that we talked about. But when we talk about engagement, it also sort of entails grassroots engagement, engaging young people at a very young age, younger than like age 8 to 9 when they're like integrating their concepts. How do we tackle religious extremism in that domain when we're talking about engagement? Because that is something that is a no-go area in Pakistan, and unless we tackle that, I don't think like engagements are going to be as meaningful. Like what Aliza mentioned is like people sort of use that to channel out their frustrations.
Three great questions.
Very good, very good. I again, very good questions, and they're actually also related. Umar, on the technology side, you are right. Why do we talk about technology and immediately think young people all across the world, right? I mean, there is that concept of, what do you guys call it, digital native and digital, who am I? Digital immigrant, right? Yeah. So I'm a digital immigrant, you grew up with this, so you will deal with it differently. But just because by virtue of being young, there is a greater likelihood of adopting new things, good or bad, right? That has always been true. And if we are in fact in an age of increasing digital innovation or technological innovation, because it may be more than digital, then you are in a moment of increasing youth bulge, you should expect the two to converge, right? So ek level to wo hai. Now that doesn't mean it does it in a good way or a bad way. In some ways, I think we need to get out of, this is for all three questions, we need to get out of this idea. I don't think we are explicitly, but it seems like we have to get out of this idea that we are somehow going to manage how young people engage with technology. Only one laga, right? My father couldn't make me do it. I can't make my kids do it, and you guys aren't going to be able to make your kids do it. Right? It's just not going to happen. What can happen is creating the spaces, this is where the fun and the digital part comes in, where what happens with newness is that a group of people, young, suddenly become better than another group of people, old, in the use of certain technologies and use it to change the power balance. Right? I did that when the remote control came. Because I, as a young person, was better at the remote control than my parents and my nanny. Young people are doing it with digital. Right? You go to any meeting and agar koi technological masla ho jaye, immediately they say ki young kaun hai. Technology is a power balance. Right? And what the reason technology becomes important in this youth and engagement question, but the youth question is, it is a tool, has always been a tool of changing the presumed power balance between one cohort and the another. I want to come to the fun question, and it's related to your question also. I think you're both right. I haven't read the book, so I can't comment on that. But what we call fun is a really important part of being young. It goes to the question I raised, what does it mean to be young? One of the numbers in that circle, us side pe, and Umar, tell me if I'm wrong, I think was, of those 100 people, 5 only would say that they have ever been to a concert. By concert, a question may be defined, someone performing anything entertaining live and them being in an audience. Right? That doesn't mean that you have to go to New York to see an opera. That means that आप गाँव में कोई गाना गा रहा है और आप गिर बैठे हैं. Right? So it is an essential part of what it means to be young. I mean, what does it mean to be young? Young means to have the ability to make mistakes before you realize they're mistakes. It's not exactly like that, but it's an age period of experimentation. And part of that fun is to be able to experiment with this abandon that age then takes away from you because you become cautious and conservative. Right? So that number of 5 out of 100 was really a eye-opening number for us. Now again, if you put that number with what the two of you are saying, I think you're exactly right. A jalsa, I was in Pakistan, I was at Lums when the big PTI sort of push started happening,
October 2011.
The first jalsa, right? And I suddenly realized there were these colleagues and staff जो अपने 3 साल के बच्चे को लेके जा रहे हैं to a jalsa. And I thought, yeah, jalsa was not this. But then I realized that, yeah, it's the best equivalent to a free concert. Right? Any party, it's PML, it's PPP. I mean, PTI, I think, invented the art form or upped the art form, and then everyone took up. Right? Essentially, a jalsa is really a cool mela. आप छोड़ देना politics किसकी है. You get music, you get food, you get to hang out with friends, you get to do things without people noticing what you are doing. What else is fun? Right? So in some ways, that space of fun is going to be taken over. And that is why, again, the building of the institutions to me is a less interesting question than the dismantling of artificial barriers. I mean, the religion may be the engagement, again, to your question, I know I'm sounding pedantic, but I really honestly believe in this. The idea that we are going to create an answer to engagement, we are going to create something that is going to, we will engage. Who is the we? To me, the engagement is not between state and young people, frankly. To me, the engagement is not between young people and not young people. The engagement I want in that third E is the engagement between young people and young people. पहले तो आप बैठ गए Twitter पे, right? Where you actually start believing that you have, what, 20,000 friends. No one has 20,000 friends. I'm sorry. I don't know how many followers you have. They are not followers. The people on Facebook are not friends. These people are making a monkey out of us by calling them followers, right? These are just people who are eavesdropping on your life. Just like you are eavesdropping on their lives. They're not friends in the way they're built, right? So the point is, the engagement I want is to create those engagements young to young. And good things do happen. For example, on employment, when we start, again, I think both the previous government and this government again is doing that. I think the world is beginning to do that. When we start thinking of employment not as I am going to create jobs, to I am going to create schemes of easier loans or entrepreneurial ecosystems. Right? That's a different policy format. One format says, I am going to create, and then other people are going to fill it. The other is saying, I'm going to create an ecosystem, and then let's see what you do with it. Now, if you go the second path, which I do think people are beginning to, then you have to have a venture capitalist view to it. right? When I create when I think, okay, I'm going to create CPEC and CPEC will have jobs. I'm thinking like a state. Those jobs are going to be filled. When I say I'm going to create a loan scheme or something, I'm thinking like a venture capitalist, which means I'm going to give out in lakh loans and 20% of them are going to be duds. That's okay. Because if the other 80,000 work and they create 2 more jobs, or half of them or 10% of them create 2 more jobs, that's the multiplier. So what I'm saying is we start thinking about policy in a different way. And that's the engagement. It doesn't answer your religion question, but I think the answer to the religion question is also the enclave mentality. There is the people who talk about religion as a problem, there are people who talk about religion as a solution, and those people do not talk to each other. Right? And the less they talk to each other, the more they think that the other is evil.
Can I attach a tack-on question to that, which is not really maybe a tack-on, but maybe a different question really? Do we talk too much about extremism? I mean, especially in the conversation about youth, I'm perplexed that extremism for the young is a problem. Isn't the very definition of being young that you are drawn to extremes of any kind? Some will be drawn to religious, others will read the Communist Manifesto and say, God damn it, this is the answer to everything. Others will read something else that they'll be drawn to. And extremism, isn't that just part and parcel of who and what it is to be young?
Yeah, that's
it. Like, I think this fixation, let me just add on to that. This fixation with extremism is really a product of 9/11. And we still haven't, even though the Americans have left Afghanistan, we're still stuck with this fixation that this is something that needs to be solved.
That framework came and again, it is like extremism is a virus and you will inoculate it once you get the right vaccine. Right, you will do the countering violence, CVE type thing. So I like that framework. I mean, my only cringe part was, not cringe, but question part was, it is also a reality. Right? I mean, Sialkot is a reality. That's not made up. But I do think you're on to something, treating it as a, this inoculation wala. A, there is a disease, B, there is a pill or vaccine, and once you get that right, once you get the CVE formula right, I think it's, sunlight is a great disinfectant for many things, especially in policy. And I come back to this, you create more interaction. I really like, I hadn't thought of it and I wish I had. I hadn't thought of it, in a way to be young is to experiment with extreme ideas. Sometimes you do it just to offend other people. Right? It's an expression of my independence. I am now 18. Right? So there is a real, not in a frivolous way, but there is a real. Now, if I'm making this up as I go, but if there is the conversation, if there is the point of conversation, like in those spaces at your hostel and whatever, where you can also have the debate between my extreme view and your extreme view, hopefully not extremist, then we are more likely to find something else. And that's why you see people who might have started on fringe, on extreme right, extreme left, by the time wo aapki umar ke hote hain, suddenly they found the middle path or whatever. But you need to give that space for interaction. Now, if your spaces become, again I go to this, if your spaces become more and more exclusive, right, and technology plays a role. The most idiotic belief you can think of, you will always find 10 people on social media who think the same. They will become your friends and followers, and you will immediately start believing everyone in the world believes that. Right? So I think creating spaces is the answer.
We'll start here. Okay, so now we have 5. Zaid, you also want to ask a question? That's 6. So we're going to go 6 just because we want to take advantage of everyone being together.
Memory test.
Yeah. So.
Hi, I work at the Youth Empowerment Program for UNDP, which was birthed from the Human Development Report that you wrote. One of the problems you're facing, obviously there are a lot of problems in terms of education and employment, but one of the problems I feel we're facing is the fact that how to not politicize engagement. Because every time we start an engagement project, some party comes over and takes over. Sometimes we don't even get to put our logo on the engagement bit. We're the one funding it. But obviously engagement, political engagement is a very healthy healthy activity for youth, but it should be healthy political engagement. Not every engagement needs to be politicized. So what do you think should be the way in which we can come to that?
So how do we protect political engagement from PR-ish exercises? Okay. Sam?
Thank you. I just want to say thank you very much for your talk and for this session to all of you. It's really interesting to me, and I thought it was a fantastic report, and I've really enjoyed reading it. In the UK, where I'm from, there's a huge debate around, particularly COVID-19 has been in some ways seen as sacrificing the prospects of youth to protect the health and futures of the old. And there's a real debate around whether that actually says something quite profound about how much we actually prioritise young people in our society. I wondered if I could try that question out for you, particularly in the Pakistan context, and whether you say, does that hold lessons about how Pakistan really, to do any of the things you say in your report, have to admit first of all that youth are a priority of the society, and is that the case?
Those are, again, two really fantastic questions. Maybe we go in two batches with these 6 questions. So maybe we end with you, and then Baba Sahab, I'm going to save you for the last. Sir.
So when we talk about meaningful engagement of youth, we mostly need functional youth. And from functional youth, I mean youth that is able to cope up with the struggles or with the challenges that when they go through, they can easily come out as well. You have been doing that national youth survey. How do we get that functional youth, or what are some of the missing pieces that we need to build in our youth to get that functional youth who are able to cope up with the challenges in today's era?
Great question.
All difficult questions. All difficult questions. I'll start with the middle one, Sam. Right? I know the debate because in the US it also kind of came up, not as much as it came up in the UK because one was following it. In the US, the politics of that distinction became different. I would be intrigued to hear from others in the room or Mosharraf whether it came up in the Pakistan context in that sense. My own sense was not really. But the larger context is very familiar.
Here the divide, just quickly on that, was elite, non-elite, and the Prime Minister leaned into that in a big way.
And so maybe, it came up in different societies around whatever the fault line was. But to me, what is intriguing about your question also is, what is very familiar in all of these societies is the struggle, even a power struggle, between demographies. Right? And in Pakistan, I'm guessing, I don't have empirical evidence of this, I'm guessing that it becomes compounded by sort of social norms of who manages whose life, right? We hear it in discourses of patriarchy, we hear it in discourses of age, we hear it in discourses of respect, right? But they become very much about sort of who is going to guide whom into this. And in some ways, that's a much more tricky ground in terms of values. I'm not doing justice to your question, but that's the most difficult part, because in some ways, if using language of control, which I just did, immediately alienates folks, right? And it can empower in the wrong way too. And that's why the language of engagement, the language of conversation that I'm talking about, this language of age essentially being, this thing that I started with, age is a flowing concept, right? It's a very different identity concept than, for example, gender. It's a very different identity concept than, for example, race. Because those concepts mostly stick around, right? I don't turn non-brown after a few years, but I do turn old, right? So age as an identity question, that's the point, becomes different, and that's the PowerPoint I started with. Okay, you can think whatever you think as young people, but know that it's not going to last. And therefore, the societal reaction is an interesting one, because you have to, if you're a smart individual or societies, you flow with that concept. It's a very different one from all other, not all, most other identity questions, which can change or not. Political, I don't know the answer to this. अगर मुझे इतनी इल्म होता तो मैं इधर बैठा होता. I don't know the answer to that, except to say that I don't think we should be that afraid of politics either. I don't think you were at UNDP when we were doing this. I could get away by smiling and say, okay, I'm not going to do what you're asking me to do, as Umar knows. But one of the things we did do, which I was very proud of, was we dealt with the political question by saying everyone in. Right, so we had every party. So we just said, let's get the thinking people from every party and let them be part of it. But my sense really is there is the partisan and PR part, which you have to navigate. But the real political part, I don't think you can or should try to navigate. In some ways, engagement is going to be messy. Right? It's like that old school development. When I was a student, the idea was if people travel a lot, they will find out that people everywhere are like them and the world will be a better place. It turns out it's not like that. You travel a lot and sometimes you find you don't like people at other places. Right? You find out other people don't like you. Engagement is a messy thing. And that means it is going to create those frictions. And so I'm not trying to cop out of this question either, but I am saying that if we are in this game, फिर हाथ कुछ ना कुछ तो मैले होने हैं. Right? Now, as long as you can navigate the PR part, letting some of that thing, this is again that venture capitalist thing. This venture capitalist thing is a serious thing. If in a lot of policy areas, this engineering, I was trained as an engineer. My first 3 degrees are engineering, but I've learned enough to know that the engineering model of policy is you make a policy and then it's supposedly going to work exactly as you thought it will. It doesn't happen like that. Right? If you do this, especially on issues like this, you have to say, even if you want to think like an engineer, you say, okay, there's going to be a 20% loss here. And then you plan for it. Right? The third question, functional. Yaar, I'm not sure functional youth kya hota hai. Har majburi mein functional hona padta hai. But the reason when we were defining what a young person is and why young is important, what we argued in the report, other people have also, is why is it important to think of young people? Right? Why is this important? Apart from there are so many. That's not the reason. The reason is that in any society or any life, most of the most important decisions in life are made in that time period. Right? You become physically complete. But I'm not saying this, I'm saying this in a medical sort of way. Right? You become your own person. You start family. You become an economic actor for the first time. You become a political actor for the first time. Right? So वो जिसको आप functional कह रहे हैं, if you are saying इकबाल का शाहीन, I don't think इकबाल का शाहीन हमें मिलने लगा है. There isn't an archetype of the right youth.
इकबाल का शाहीन तो शायद इकबाल खुद भी नहीं था.
I don't think I'm a big fan of Iqbal. I don't think Iqbal was looking for a Shaheen in that sense. Right? I think that he was looking at it in an aspiration form. So I don't think you are meaning that, but I think some people do mean that, where there is an archetype of Acha Bacha. Right? And we are going to make everyone an Acha Bacha. I'm unfortunately a wrong case study. When I was young, the parents of all my friends thought their kids should be like me because they really didn't know me. Now, people, my kids, anyhow, I won't go into that. But the point I'm making is, Acha Bacha nahi milan laga.
I mean, to make your point, I was the other end of the spectrum.
Right.
So,
right. So the point is, we need to give role models, we need to give aspirations, but we are not going to create a archetype of what a good young Pakistani is going to be, because if your cohort is 150 million, उसमें अच्छा बच्चा भी होगा, उसमें शाहीन भी होगा, उसमें एक्सट्रीमिस्ट भी होगा, उसमें लुच्चा भी होगा, उसमें लफंगा भी होगा. Right? It's just a demographic fact. कि 150 million जब होंगे तो you're going to have that diversity. This is the point I was making earlier. Then you have to learn to say कि यार, we have to live with that diversity. That's how it comes, rather than to have one archetype. And now we are going to somehow do policy जिसमें सारे के सारे through curriculum change or whatever are going to be there. But thank you. I know we have.
Yeah, and also I'm conscious of time, but I'm having too much fun to stop. Zaid. Do we have any other questions other than Zaid and Babar Saab?
And I'll promise to be short this time.
Okay, so Zaid, and introduce yourself and tell us how old you are as well.
You talked in your talk about how there's a lot of rage amongst the youth. और आपने जो तीसरा E was engagement, right? So how much do you feel that this rage amongst the youth, this anger amongst the youth, is simply because of their attempts at engagement are bound to be futile, in the sense that, like in Pakistan, if I want to be MNA, if I want to influence legislation, it's like basically possible unless मेरे पास हज़ारों एकड़ ज़मीन हो / sugar factory या जो भी हो. So how much of this rage do you think is simply just there because they know that to engage, you already have to be in a position to engage? That sounds a bit like a catch-22. But they see a catch-22, they're like, hey, I need to change this, but I cannot change it. So don't you think that also contributes to the rage amongst the youth?
Babar Sahab.
Coming from a research perspective,
Babar Sahab is the head of Ipsos in Pakistan and a very dear friend and close partner.
Thank you for being here.
my question was that when you study, did you have the data or the perspective to actually have a segmentation of mindsets of youth in terms of how many of them, let's say, they are traditionalist, how much quantifying, the forward-looking, etc. And do we need to do it, and do we need to see how it has evolved over time in the last few decades? And can we predict where we are heading in terms of the mindsets segmentation? This is one question. And very small other question. You talked about the early pictures of 2022. Okay. Wherever pre-pandemic. Wherever you see, you will see that people, young people, they were gathering, shouting, whatever, for some noble cause. Some noble cause. They will get together, but for something greater than beyond their personal issues. Why in Pakistan we can't see it? Just quoting the recent example of Sialkot, across all the society, everyone condemned, but there were no person came out to have a solidarity like Black Lives Matter. I mean, that movement has not completely eroded the issue of Black lives, hatred, but at least it sensitized the whole society, rather not in the US only, across the world. So everyone did. Why we have not been able to actually respond to that? What are the real stumbling blocks in our way, whereby we cannot express ourselves? I hope my question is clear.
The easiest part of these two very good interventions, the easiest part is there some data on what you're calling mindset? We didn't use the language you used, but there is a lot of data in the report, वो आखिरी slide में भी जल्दी से निकल गया था, which is about sort of attitudes towards others, attitudes towards people who are not like you, attitudes towards, there's a lot. We don't have a time series because we've done it only once. We'd hope sort of there, so there isn't a comparison basis except anecdotal, but at least data wise on that, and that was the scary picture that I was saying, कि जो हमारी pathologies from other generations have just been transmitted. Right? So instead of this idea that somehow the youth are different in those pathologies, I no longer believe in. Right? Which is a sad thing to say. In fact, if anything, anecdotally, it may become worse because the more we have fragmented, the deeper our divisions have become. Right? That's my sense, but I don't have time. Now, on your question, and I'll link both. The answer immediately is yes. It's one. But the answer, so yes, you want to engage, you can't seem to engage, and therefore you get angry, right? You meaning young people. And that is true, but that's always been true, right? ये ऐसा नहीं कि अब हो गया, ऐसा नहीं था कि जब मैं 17 साल का था तो मैं जाके एमएनए को कहता था रूल चेंज कर दो और वो कर देता था. पहले भी ऐसे था, right? पहले भी मैं एंग्री था. So has the anger changed at one level? No. I mean, in other places I've been talking this week a lot about 1890, which I think is a better year to understand 2021. in terms of global politics and so on and so forth. In 1890, अगर आप अखबार उठा लें, there were lots of young people out on the street, 1890s में, right? There were new movements of the left coming, Marxism was taking root, colonialism के खिलाफ हो रहा था. It was 1890s were very much like the 2020s, like, but that's a separate वाली talk मैं कर चुका हूँ. I won't repeat this. I'll come back to you. So you are right in that being one of the forces that is. It may be, I think, that there are other things that exacerbate it now. One of which is technology and the ability to broadcast that anger, right? That anger which in my place would have been very limited to myself and a few friends can now become a tweet. That tweet can become a sort of flow, right? So A, it's that. B, I think the promises made to this generation, right? That's the Greta problem, the Greta challenge, and not being kept, right? So again and again, Mosharraf and I come and say कि जी ये हो जाएगा, and वो फिर नहीं होता. The climate change doesn't stop, right? The jobs don't appear. That also expands this. So I think it's a more complex thing, but your answer is right. On your sir, आपका last वाला क्या था, which is I really do want. हाँ, Black Lives. हाँ, उस पे this is a good point to end on, right? You want me to end? This is a really good point. I am an optimist. मैं एमी शमी नहीं पिंक स्वेटर पहन के फिरता. I do think there are good things happening. The problem is there is not enough of them. I have been in the US 30 years. Black Lives Matter didn't happen in 1 year. 30 saal, just like here, again and again, every year this would happen. And then at some point it goes, just 1 minute and then that. So I think many good things are happening. There are young people out there, right? I do see more protests. There is, वो चाहे student union के लिए हो, चाहे वो environment के लिए हो, those forces, if you expect कि वो एक बार निकलेंगे, and this is for the young person there, that you will come out once and you will say make this change and the change will happen, I'm sorry, it's not going to happen that way. But the Pakistan of 2021 and the young people of 2021 are not the young people of 1989 that was me. And that's good news.
On that note, this was fantastic. Exceeded all expectations, and really, I wish we had more time. We would have kept going. We could have kept going on and on. I think especially because of the engagement of our audience, a great and deep and profound thanks to everyone that made time and joined us here. As I said, it's a very special time and day and moment for us in terms of our new residence, our new habitat, and also because Adil Najam is here and he's granted us this privilege. So a round of applause for Adil and for our audience. And we will now proceed to